All right. I am the one preaching, and so you can expect a sports analogy to work its way in. And you look at this photo, and the word GOAT comes into your head, right? Or greatness. You see Jordan and Tiger and Brady and Gretzky and Babe Ruth and Metzi, and I think it's Carl Lewis. I feel like Ali should be on there as well. But sometimes you see this and you're like, man, like those are just exceptional people. And other times you see this and you're like, I hate them. Because maybe you've played against them. And like I grew up hating Michael Jordan. I know it's a confession here, but I'm from Indiana. I was a Pacers fan. And he seemed to always be shown favoritism by the referees when he was playing my team, at least. I don't know, even if you watched the game last night, like, was Jokic not getting favoritism by the refs? Like, come on, right? And Edwards wasn't getting those calls. What's up with that? I guess it's because Jokic is the MVP. But there's this dichotomy with people who are great, or especially with people who see themselves as great. Like, part of what made Jordan so annoying wasn't the fact that he was a great basketball player. He was, I can admit that. Not quite as good as LeBron, but he was great. The problem is that he saw himself as great. And that's what made him especially obnoxious. Like, isn't that what made Ali obnoxious? Is that he was constantly going around declaring how awesome he was. And I don't know about you, but like those kinds of people, like they just rub me the wrong way. Like I don't really want to hang out with people that are always reminding me of their greatness. In fact, it makes me want to root against them. And we are going to see that in the passage for today as we start our new series called The Dreamer. We're going back to the book of Genesis, finishing up this book. We've been in several series throughout the last few years, and so we get to finish it with this series as Joseph becomes the central character in the narrative. When we last left off, he was just born. Jacob came through his trials, and now he is a father of 10 kids. Having a stressful time. And one of his kids, though, is Joseph. And as we'll see here soon, Joseph was pretty full of himself. Like, I feel like sometimes we portray him as this, like, wonderful character. Like, who doesn't like Joseph? Look at the baby of the family and how he rose to the top. But there's a reason his brothers put him in the cistern. There's a reason they sold him into slavery. Joseph was well about Joseph, at least at the start. Genesis 37. Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. This is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Like, what's the easiest way to get on your siblings' bad side? Hey, Dad, they weren't doing their job. They weren't shepherding well. And sometimes we see this and like, what a faithful son. But the word behind bad report actually has this connotation that goes along with it, as it was a defamatory report. Like Joseph's intention was to get his brothers in trouble. Anyone ever tattled on your sibling with the intention of getting them in trouble? Yeah. It's not because you were all that concerned about justice. But part of you just wanted to bring your siblings down a notch. And that's what Joseph's doing here. It's not like he's worried about the prosperity of the family business. He wants to lower his big brothers down a notch. And he does so. Now, Israel, this is another name for Jacob. Jacob got the name Israel after wrestling with God. Loved Joseph more than any of his other sons. Does that strike you as wrong? Some of you are going, yeah, I'm the Joseph of our family. Anyone want to admit to being your parents' favorite kid? Anyone admit that your parents had a different favorite kid besides you? Like, you know that good things don't happen when parents have favorite kids. And Joseph openly had a favorite kid. Think about how toxic that would be in a family. Because he had been born to him in his old age. He was his last born kid. He came from his wife Rachel, his favorite wife. Probably also not a good thing to have a favorite wife unless it's your only one. And he made an ornate robe for him. Let me make you a special coat. Contrary to Broadway, this is not a coat of many colors, I'm sorry. It's not what the word means. It means like a royal coat or a fancy coat. You can guess that it has many colors. That was a Latin translation mix-up back in the day. But he has a fancy coat. His brothers don't have the fancy coat. And so he would wear it around as this sign that I'm Dad's favorite. And when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Like, Jacob's not doing Joseph any favors. Joseph's already a bit full of himself. Jacob contributes to this by openly showing favoritism toward him. And like, are we really surprised that his brothers hated him? Like, already, and it's like, no, if Dad's trying to build him up, if Dad's constantly talking about how awesome Joseph is, why can't you guys be more like Joseph? They develop this animosity. And so here's this, monumental truth. Favoritism within a family creates a culture of envy, hatred, and discord. Favoritism within a family creates a culture of envy, hatred, and discord. And this can be favoritism that is real, or it can be favoritism that is just perceived. Like, it's hard as parents, right, when you celebrate one child, and when they do something that's legitimately praiseworthy, but sometimes merely the exuberant celebration makes the other child feel not as good. Like, it's tough to do this as parents. It's tough to make sure that the perception of favoritism doesn't exist, and yet it's something that we should strive for. It's something that we should make a goal in our parenting. Like, sometimes we joke about who's someone's favorite kid. And depending on like the time of day, you may have a favorite kid that changes over the course of an hour. But ultimately, we want to equally love and show that love to all of our kids. Equality is the antidote to favoritism. And every family member is equal in dignity, worth, and value, and deserves to be loved. It's hard because we're not all good at the same things. And sometimes we inherently value one aspect of humanity over another, and that comes out and is expressed in favoritism when it really shouldn't be. We should look for opportunities to celebrate and love all of our kids. And so we see the dysfunction that's present already in Joseph's family. Is things are not starting off well. And, well, Joseph's not going to do himself any favors here. See, Joseph had a dream. And when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. Why would they hate him? Because he's just sharing his dream. This wasn't like he had a dream of like being an NBA player. Right? God gave him a dream. And he said to them, listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. I can't imagine why his brothers would be upset. Who would think that this would give them animosity toward him? Oh, by the way, guys, one day I'm going to be in charge. You're all going to worship me. This is the vision I had. Like, the vision, there's nothing wrong with the vision. It's a true vision. It's going to come to pass. But it doesn't mean he has to keep sharing it. And then he has another dream. His brothers said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? Like, hey, you're like 17. Some of us are in our 40s and 50s. You really think you're going to be in charge someday? And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. And then he had another dream and he told it to his brothers. Listen, he said, I had another dream because it went real well the first time you shared it. And this time the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. Now mom and dad are in on the action. And when he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, what's this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you? They will. That's at the end of the series. His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. So Jacob at first, he rebukes him and says, like, don't say that. And it very well may be, he shouldn't have said it. Isn't it enough for him to know, but yet he seems to be reinforcing this idea of, I'm better than you. I'm better than you. Anybody ever have a sibling like that? I'm not saying I have. My brother could be watching on TV. If anything, I was probably of the obnoxious brother. But Jacob keeps the matter in mind. He's like, that might happen. We know this. Like self-promotion and the denigration of others combine to create a culture of envy, hatred, and discord. Like, what's your posture in your relationships with other people? Are you a person like Joseph who looks for opportunities for self-promotion? Hey, do you remember that dream I had? Do you remember when you got in trouble and I told on you? Check out my coat. It's look good, right? Like, Joseph's about Joseph. And part of being about yourself means that not only do you look for opportunities to puff yourself up, but you also look for opportunities to tear others down. Dad, you need to know the shady stuff that my brothers are doing. And there's this toxic nature, like in order to validate our own existence, in order to find worth in ourselves, we feel this need to make sure that everybody else knows how awesome we are. And to make sure that everybody else knows how not awesome other people are. Like some of my favorite sports people are the ones like Durant after this last basketball series where he's like, Anthony Edwards was great. He just got beat by him, and he can say like, no, he was great. And Edwards can say, he's my favorite player of all time. And they can actually compliment each other. They're not having this like macho contest. Like that should be the posture that we all exhibit of being able to appreciate the greatness in each other. We don't need to promote ourselves. Self-promoters are not fun to be around. Nor are like, don't we learn this early on? It was one of like our kindergarten values, like no put downs. Like there's no reason to tear other people down. It doesn't actually lift yourself up. See, some more antidotes. Humility is the antidote to self-promotion. Joseph's not there yet. He's not there yet. And serving and building others up are the antidotes to denigration. Like what if instead of looking for ways to promote ourselves, we looked for ways to build others up? Wouldn't that, aren't those the people that you want to be around? Aren't those the kinds of people God designed us to be, of highlighting the good things that we see in others and serving them, rather than highlighting the good we see in ourselves and getting other people to serve us? These are fundamental contrasts in the human life. Well, Joseph's sin and his brother's sin are going to have some pretty significant consequences here in the rest of this chapter. Now, his brothers had gone to graze their father's flocks near Shechem, which is interesting because it's been a while, so I don't expect you to remember this, but the Jacob's family had just killed a whole bunch of the Shechemites. And Israel said to Joseph, "As you know, your brothers are grazing the flocks near Shechem. Come, I'm going to send you to them." "Very well," he replied. He's probably just worried about his kids. Shechem's like 50 miles away. So like they could have been gone for weeks at a time. And he's like, "Hey, go check on your brothers." Not sure why Jacob thought this was a good idea. And so he said to him, "Go see if all's well with your brothers and with the flocks, and bring word back to me." And then he sent him off from the valley of Hebron. At least Jacob cares about the well-being of his other kids. Like, that's an improvement. Continue on. When Joseph arrived at Shechem, a man found him wandering around in the fields and asked him, "What are you looking for?" He replied, "I'm looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they're grazing their flocks?" "They've moved on from here," the man answered. "I heard them say, 'Let's go to Dothan.'" And so Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan, but they saw him in the distance. And before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. It's an interesting sequence here. And one of the things I think is that is in God's providence. They weren't in Shechem. They go to Dothan. Dothan is on the trade route that goes to Egypt. If they had stayed in Shechem, there wouldn't have been a caravan of traders coming through. And yet that's where they are. And so they see him coming. "Hey, here's the guy in the coat. Here's Daddy's favorite. Man, we hate him." Like, how much do you have to hate him to want to kill him? But they do. And they say, "Here comes that dreamer." Apparently, the whole thing about him sharing his dreams didn't sit well with the brothers. "Here's the dreamer. Here comes the dreamer," they said to each other. "The guy that thinks he's going to be in charge. Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams. Let's see him try to rule over us if he's dead. Then his dream's not coming true." And a cistern is a hole in the ground designed to hold the water that comes down. So sometimes we'll simplify it and we'll say it's a well. Like, wells have water in them that you draw out. The cisterns catch the water that's available. This cistern's going to be dry. That's why it's a cistern. It just holds the water that comes in during the rainy season, and you can drink it when you need it. So they want to throw him in one of these water pits. At least one of his brothers cares. When Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. Let's not take his life. He said, don't shed any blood. Throw him into the cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him. Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. So Reuben had a secret plan that he was going to let the other brothers move on, leave Joseph in the pit, and then come back and get him and take him home. Probably because then he would be the father's second favorite. But he plays it off, and he's like, hey, if we throw him in the pit, then we can say we didn't lay a hand on him. We don't have to lie to Dad. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe he was wearing. They took him and they threw him into the cistern. And the cistern was empty. There was no water in it, so he didn't drown. And as they sat down to eat their meal, it's such a transition, right? We just threw our brother in a pit. You guys hungry? Yeah, me too. But it just shows you a callousness of heart to move on from, we threw our brother in the pit, let's go eat. They looked up and they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. We can keep moving through. And Judah said to his brothers, what will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood. His brothers agreed. Wouldn't it be nicer instead of killing him if we just sell him into slavery? And on the one hand, you're like, I suppose, maybe, death now, you're stealing his life one way or another. By the way, my firstborn son is named Judah Joseph, so he should be paying attention to this story. And the brothers are like, yeah, we could make some money. And then I guess we don't feel as bad about ourselves. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. Great brothers. What a dysfunctional family. What a dysfunctional family. How's Dad going to respond? Apparently, Reuben was away when this happened. He maybe wasn't as hungry as the other guys. But when Reuben returned to the cistern and saw that Joseph wasn't there, he tore his clothes. He went back to his brothers and said, the boy's not there! Where can I turn now? And then they got Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the robe in blood. They didn't have, DNA testing back then. He wouldn't have known, that's goat's blood, not human blood. And they took the ornate robe back to their father and said, we found this. Examine to see whether it's your son's robe. And he recognized it and said, it's my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces. And then Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. No, he said, I will continue to mourn until I join my son in the grave. So his father wept for him. His favorite son had just died. And meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. And that's where chapter 37 ends. It's a cliffhanger, right? It really is a cliffhanger, because after this we switch gears to a chapter about Judah that we'll look at next week. But he wants you to see, Joseph went from being this proud braggart, thinking that he's going to rule over everything, to being a slave, And I think it's part of his story. Because I think that when we are brought low, it gives God space to do his powerful work. Like sometimes when we are that prideful, when we are that full of ourselves, we need to be brought low for God to do the powerful work that's needed in our lives. And I think sometimes we miss that aspect of this story. We focus on Joseph as the victim. And yeah, he was a victim. It doesn't justify his brother's evil. Just because Joseph was a little brat doesn't mean that his brothers should have punished him. But in God's providence, God uses their evil for his good. Both Joseph himself's good and the nation's eventual good. Because he's brought low. He's no longer the favored son. He's a slave in the household of the captain of the army. And that's not going to be a pleasant experience. And God does a work in his life. Maybe you've had a similar story where God brought you down low, but as you look back on it now, you can see that it was only in that time of lowness that God was able to accomplish what needed to be accomplished in your life. That he transforms us when we can finally recognize our frailty and weakness. I want to jump ahead to the end of the book. And eventually Joseph's able to say this. These are words from Joseph's mouth to his brothers. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. He has the hindsight. He can look back and say, like, God really did a work through that. It doesn't mean that what they did was good. It doesn't mean that the brothers are praiseworthy for throwing Joseph in the pit and selling him into slavery. They weren't. That was still properly called evil. But here's the amazing thing about our God, is that God has a habit of redeeming the evil done by us and to us and bringing good out of it. It doesn't mean we celebrate the evil, right? But we celebrate the God who can redeem it. And so in God's power and providence, he is able to take the evil that we do, to take the evil that others do, and pull good out of what seems to be an impossibly disastrous situation. And he's going to do that in this story. If you want to see how it happened, you have to keep coming back the next few weeks. Or you can read ahead in your Bibles. We encourage that. It's okay to look ahead. But God has a habit of doing this in our lives. As he can use the scars that we carry, he can use the trauma of our past to bring good into the presence for ourselves and others. In fact, we see it most powerfully in Jesus, where our ultimate good was achieved by the evil carried out on the cross against Jesus. Our ultimate good came about because of the evil of other human beings. And God took it and used it to save humanity. In the Joseph story, many lives were saved. In the Jesus story, millions of lives were saved. As God redeemed the evil act of the cross by raising Jesus from the grave and saving millions who placed their faith in him. May we recognize just how good God is. And when we find ourselves in those low moments, look for and ask for the redemption that only God is capable of of bringing. God can take you from that pit, and he can redeem the junk in your life and do something beautiful and amazing through it. He did it for Joseph, and he has a habit of doing it over and over again. Look at how dysfunctional Joseph's family was. Maybe you can say, hey, Joseph's family ain't got nothing on mine. God can take even the most dysfunctional family and bring redemption and goodness out of it. Would you pray with me? Father, we come before you amazed at your power, amazed at the evil our own hearts and other human hearts are capable of, yet convinced that you are not a God who can be defeated by the powers of evil, either cosmic or human, but that your good will prevail. God, take the brokenness of our families, take the brokenness of our souls, take the brokenness of our world, and may you redeem it for your glory and the good of your people. In Jesus' name, amen.